Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I am Jess Rennie. I work on the Speedgoat team and with UTMB. And I just want to give a huge thank you to Hayden for being here and for leading this webinar for us. We're super excited to have her back for a second year to talk to us about how to fuel for Speedgoat. So she's definitely an expert in the field and obviously local and has raced Speedgoat a handful of times. So really excited to have her and thankful for her to share her expertise. So, and then we also have Kelsey on the call. Kelsey's going to be interpreting for us, which is really great. So I'll probably pin the two of them so that way we can make sure that they stay on screen constantly. But otherwise, yeah, thank you all for being here. Really excited that you joined us tonight, and then super excited to hopefully see you on race day, Speak Out Weekend in a few months. So I'll turn it over to Hayden and let her take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having me again, Jessica, and also thanks to Women of the Wasatch. Like Jessica mentioned, I've raced Speedgoat a few times. I've done the 50K 3 times. I'm local to Salt Lake City. I am not registered this year. I told myself to take a break from the race. But today we're going to cover race day fueling. So my plan is to have about 40 minutes, 45 minutes of content, 15 to 20 minutes of questions. You are welcome to put your questions in the chat box as you think of them, but we'll wait till the end to cover the questions. Just double checking audio is good. Can people hear me? Just some thumbs up. All I need is a couple. Great, thanks, Jessica. Okay. I am a board certified sports dietitian. I'm also a diabetes educator. I've had my own sports nutrition private practice for the last 6-ish years, although this last year I really took a step back from it and got a full-time job as an insulin pump trainer as I work in diabetes. I run race distances anywhere from 5K to 50K, really like multi-day adventure runs, that kind of thing. So I have a very personal interest in sports nutrition and fueling. Today I want to help you guys, and if I keep looking over this way, it's because I have my second screen that has the slides on. But today I want to help you understand the the calorie and carbohydrate intake goals during runs and races, understanding how to calculate sweat rate and use that data for your goal fluid and carbohydrate intake during runs and races, how to practice your fueling plan, and then understanding how to prevent overheating during summer races. Speedgoat is a very hot race, so that can be very helpful for nutrition. So why do we care about intra-run nutrition? Well, we're really trying to maintain performance. So the goal is maintaining performance by maintaining higher carbohydrate oxidation rates. This also helps us with our endurance capacity, so helps us to keep going. A lot of misconceptions that I hear is with fueling during exercise is when we are racing something very long, we're at a lower intensity level than, say, a 5K or sprinting. So people wonder, well, why should we focus on carbohydrates when we are using a lot of fat as fuel? So despite that carbohydrate oxidation rates, so carbohydrate oxidation meaning we're burning the carbs, we're using them, being lower in ultra endurance activity in favor of fat, reduced rate of carb oxidation is associated with reduced running speed, depletion of our stored sugar, which is called our glycogen, and low blood sugar, which can reduce our performance. It's also a much more efficient fuel source. So carbohydrate oxidation actually gives us 10% more energy per liter of oxygen when compared to fat. So that means that we have a lower demand for oxygen at certain speeds. And this is very helpful, especially when we're racing at altitude. So the last purpose would be that we need to maintain fluid balance for thermoregulation and our cardiovascular stability. We really need to keep our heart pumping as efficiently as possible. So the focus of intra-run fueling is total calories, macronutrients, so protein, carbs, fat, we'll cover that, fluid, and electrolytes. So these are the 4 components that we're going to cover today. So there's a lot going on in the slide, so I'm going to cover this very slowly. The main focus of intra-run fueling, especially for the 30K and 50K that is Speedgoat, is that we're focusing on carbohydrates. That is the predominant macronutrient, so macro being protein, carbs, or fat, that we want to be intaking during the race. Generally speaking, when we are racing or running at least 2.5 hours, we want to aim for about 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So 1 gram of carbohydrate is equivalent to 4 calories. So when we translate that 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, that gets us to a goal of about 240 to 400 calories per hour. If we're running or racing lower than that, we could aim for a little less in that 30 to 60 gram of carb per hour. So I'm thinking of training runs, and we will get into practicing the fueling plan and training runs and how to do that in a later slide. When we think about eating 60 grams of carb per hour or 240 calories per hour that's coming from carbs, it's important that we eat fuel that has what we call multiple transportable carbohydrates. So what does this mean? This means that we're getting different types of sugars. So glucose and fructose are what you're really going to see on pretty much just about every gel product or chew or sports drink. And the reason being, we have little doors, little transporters for different types of sugar. And so if we only eat one kind of sugar, we don't have enough doors to allow that sugar to get through and leave the intestine to really absorb it. So we want to consume different types of sugars to maximize the doors. You don't really need to worry about that. If you're using sports nutrition products, those are going to have multiple transportable carbohydrates in them. And I have a slide for some of these different carbs. What you might typically see also in a gel, chew, sports drink product is something called maltodextrin. And maltodextrin are just chains of glucose. So what you might see on a food label on some of these is maltodextrin and fructose. So maltodextrin and glucose, think of them as pretty much the same thing. And that leads me into some of these fueling options. I do recommend when we have 60 grams of carb per hour, this is a lot of carb. So using things like gels and sports chews, gummies, sports drinks, these are going to help you meet this fueling goal a lot more than whole foods. So I like to say when we get into really building your own fueling plan is to focus on these and then use the whole foods or the things like the goldfish, the pretzels, the chips, minimally and more as I want to choose something different. I want to taste something different than a gel. You might be thinking, what about fat and protein? So the cutoff time for Speedgoat 50K is about 13 hours. It's really debatable whether or not we actually need fat and protein during the race for something of this distance. If you're someone who has racing experience in ultras and you do tend to get hungry and want to choose something and have something different, it's okay to incorporate things that have fat and protein, as in like goldfish have fat in them. Cheez-Its have a little fat in them. And when we get to the next slide, I'll show you some other things. But really, the focus is carbohydrates from a carb oxidation perspective and from the fact that fat and protein digest a lot slower than carbohydrates. So it can overwhelm the digestive tract to overdo it on both protein and fat. Whereas our bodies are very efficient at digesting and metabolizing carbohydrates. So these are a handful of options. I know that NAC is a sponsor of Speedgoat, so that's going to be on course. So I made sure to include some of the NAC products here on the slide. I only really made a slide for gels and chews. There's a plethora of sports drinks as well. Pretty much every single one of these brands also makes sports drinks. And so if we think about 60 grams of carbs an hour as a kind of a minimum goal in both the 30K and the 50K, we can start to see, just quickly think about how much is that per hour. So we can see some of these typical lower carb gels are really in the 20 to 25 gram carb range. And then we can start to see these higher carb gels that are coming out. So notice that some of these same companies have a lower carb option and a higher carb option. So NAC makes a 25 gram carb. They also make a 30 gram carb. Cis makes a lower carb and a 40 gram carb. So within certain brands, there are higher options. And as we get into building this fueling plan, we'll start to see maybe some advantages of using some of the higher carb options, less packaging, less to pack. You can throw it down generally just as quickly as you can throw down a smaller gel. Whereas if we look at chews, they're very variable in their carb amounts. But one thing to note with chews versus gel, for example, like a Welch's gummy fruit snacks or a gummy snack, that small package is about 15 grams of carb. So it would be really difficult to try to exclusively fuel with chews just because you're chewing so much. It's just a lot of chewing. So I am biased in recommending that we do prioritize liquids and gels for carbs, and then bring in things like chews or other whole foods intermittently to help supplement if you really don't like them. But just because this carb recommendation is a large amount, and it starts to feel maybe unattainable if we're only using things like chews. One thing I really like to do, because sports nutrition products are very expensive, is during my training, I actually like to make homemade gels for my long runs. So you can purchase these 150 ml flasks online. You can get them on the feed. Certain companies make them on their own company website. You can buy all the ingredients on Amazon. You can buy maltodextrin powder, fructose powder, because it's just sugar. And I like to recommend sodium citrate. It just has a less salty taste than sodium chloride, which is our table salt. And you can also purchase that on Amazon, and a juice of choice. And it's a lot cheaper, I can tell you that. So what I like to do is train with the homemade, especially on a long run when I know I'm going to need a lot of fuel, because this whole gel flask ends up being 500 calories. So if it was a shorter run, I might actually end up using other fuel or use half of it and stick it in the fridge and use it the next day, which is probably not the most sanitary, but hey, um, sometimes it happens. So my favorite flavor is just doing basically a lime juice, and I do a little bit of Angostura bitters in it. If there's any cocktail fans out there that like to put bitters in their drinks, but you can really do any flavor. So this is can really be customized into whatever you want. So highly recommend the homemade gel if you are on a budget. And then we'll move into fluid and then electrolytes, and then we'll kind of put this all together. Fluid is very important. If you were to ask me what's more important between fluid and caloric intake, I'd probably lean a little bit more on the fluid side, because severe dehydration can be so dangerous. First off, it can really affect performance and it can be dangerous. So um, I'm going to help you figure out how to establish a sweat rate and why this is so important. We can see performance deficits across a lot of disciplines, not just running, with as little as 2% weight loss during the activity. So if you are experiencing weight loss during activity, that's not you losing body fat, that is you losing fluid. However, there's a lot of debate about ideal fluid status in terms of weight loss during activity. Pardon me for abbreviating WUSR. WUSR stands for Western States Endurance Race, the 100-mile race that happens in June and finishes in Auburn, California every year. They do a lot of data collection, and some of the fastest runners at WUSR have tolerated body mass losses in the 3.5 to 4%, and that it might not actually correlate with being in an unsafe range. So there's another study found that no correlation between 3% body mass losses and a raised deep body temperature, despite being very hot conditions for part of the race. So some of that loss of body weight could have been attributed to what we call substrate utilization. So burning your stored carbs, maybe a little bit of fat and protein degradation. But we also see that in the literature that 4% body mass loss is associated with increased risk of developing hyperthermia or overheating. So, we're kind of aiming for not really losing more than 3 or 4% of our body mass during a race. And you might think, okay, well, how do I know what I'm losing? If there's one thing that you do for yourself to figure out fueling as an endurance athlete, I can't stress enough the importance of sweat rate testing. It is very easy to do, and it is very valuable information. So you can do pre and post exercise weigh-ins, preferably nude, because that loss can be attributed to fluid. And when I work with people on this, I have them keep sometimes an Excel spreadsheet and document what they were doing, what the temperature was, and what their effort level was for that workout. And then you can start to see a pattern of, okay, when it's like moderate temps out, or cool, moderate, 50, 60 degrees, my sweat rate might be around here in an easy effort run. Whereas in a hot run, it might be around here. So um, if if you're someone who really tries to avoid looking at the scale at all, and you feel comfortable with someone in your household looking at the scale for you, you can stand on it backwards and have someone give you the rate of change, or pardon me, the change in weight, and that can also be helpful for establishing. This is really your best way of figuring out your sweat rate. I'll cover some of the sweat rate testing devices out there, but all those devices take an isolated measurement from an area, and that doesn't give you a perspective of your entire body sweat loss, right? Because we could sweat more from in one area of our body compared to another. So this imaginary person who weighs 155 pounds pre-run, post-exercise weight, they're 151 pounds. I forgot to put the, oh no, I did put exercise duration, 60 minutes. And we got a difference in weight of 3 pounds. And that was about 2.6% of their weight loss. So I converted that into liters per hour, and we got a sweat rate of about 1.4 liters per hour for this person. So when we can get those sweat rates, then we can say, okay, if I am sweating out about 1.4 liters per hour, what do I need to take in to offset that loss to keep me under maybe the 3% weight loss? I'm going to check the chat box. I want to see if, oh, okay. It was just Jessica. When we talk about fluid, it's easy to think about electrolytes. The primary electrolyte we are losing in sweat is sodium. This by far exceeds what we're losing from in potassium, magnesium, so calcium. There is an overemphasis on replacing sodium across all disciplines, across all sports. The sports drink and electrolyte industry has done a really good job at convincing us that we need lots and lots of sodium on a daily basis and on a repletion basis. I'm here to debunk that having too much sodium is going to cause you more problems than going slightly under sodium intake. Yes, sodium is important. It is helpful for absorption, fluid absorption. It's also very helpful for stimulating thirst. So it really can help us continue to drink because fueling during exercise is tricky. We're fueling in the absence of hunger. It's a tool. Some of the at-home sweat testing, there's a lot of things out there that exist. The reliability and efficacy of a lot of these tests, we just don't really have the data. However, I do use this in my practice because I think that even if the information isn't super accurate, I think it's at least gives us a ballpark and that we don't need to have exact information. The tests that I recommend the most are number one for at home is the H drop. It is a reusable, so it's a device. You can wear it. It has a sensor on it. You can wear it on your arm. If the band is big enough, you can put it other places as well. And that can be really helpful in establishing your sweat sodium concentration. It also does measure sweat rate, but again, I really think the scale is a much more accurate measure of what your sweat rate is. That H drop runs about $200. So it is pretty pricey. Let's say if you have any running buddies in your area, if you guys all want to go in and, pass it around, that can be a nice tool to have. There also is the precision sweat test. It's the little electrode they put on your arm. If anyone has seen that, that's also a very popular method. Some practitioners aren't a big fan of that one because when you get that test done, you're sitting, so you're not exercising. And while our sweat sodium concentration does remain fairly stable, it will change over very intense and hot environments. But I still think it can be a valuable baseline, depending on the cost of the test, but it is a one-time test that will probably run you $150. So if you want to be able to use this and figure it out at different data points in different environments, getting it reusable can be really nice. There's also Levelin. I have a lot of dietitian friends who use this. I've actually never had a client use Levelin, but they are very um, popular. They send you something to do, and you send in, I forget what it is, but you go back and forth with them. So I like the H drop because it is reusable. I'm going to check the text box. I will take this question. Someone said when they do very long runs over 8 hours, I'm taking in a lot of fluids, but I might lose 4 to 5 pounds. How much of that weight loss is metabolism of glucose in the muscles, blood, and liver? Probably not that much. I really think it's kind of a moot point. It's mostly going to be fluid, for sure. And I would focus on that number being more so fluid. So what should we do with replacing sweat sodium? There is not an exact science on replacing sodium during ultra endurance events. No matter what anyone says, there is not a ton of solid data on this. But what we do know is if you start to reduce your fluid intake during your race, so if you start to get dehydrated during an effort, what will initially happen with your um, like plasma sodium is that it will start to actually raise because the more dehydrated you get, it's going to concentrate that sodium. So a good rule of thumb is if you start to fall off on your fluid intake, you absolutely need to pull back on your sodium intake. Because if you keep replacing sodium and not replacing adequate fluid, you are going to create gastrointestinal issues. What happens sometimes if we flood the gut with sodium, it wants to draw in fluid from other areas of the body to help with that absorption. And what can happen there is nausea and diarrhea. So when you're thinking about building your race day fluid plan, depending on what you like and what you're typically successful with, if you know you're a good fluid drinker, maybe you can use get your sodium from your gels. But what can happen is if your gels and all your fuel are really high sodium, and then you stop drinking water and you keep eating, well, we're going to have a really high sodium intake and a very low fluid intake. So sometimes it can be nice to have a fluid option that is a little bit higher sodium, because as long as you're drinking, then you are likely getting that adequate amount of sodium. So average sweat sodium concentration is about 900 milligrams of sodium per liter of fluid. So if we look at this chart, we can see this 919 is kind of our average sodium concentration. At this top bar is if we are replacing a percent of the fluid losses, then what should we be replacing sodium wise? Notice that if you are only replacing half of what you're losing fluid wise, we really don't need to be intaking sodium. Notice that it's not until we're replacing a lot of the fluid and have a very high sodium concentration of sweat that we begin to replace sodium. Sodium replacement, admittedly, feels very complicated, but I think a good rule of thumb is whatever your sweat sodium concentration test is saying is really planning for no more than about 50% of that sodium, unless you are a very heavy sweater. So if you're someone who is turning over a lot of water, this could be someone that with higher body mass. Sometimes if you have the more body mass you have, right, that's more surface area to sweat. So you might be someone who needs to replace more sodium. But you can see here that even if we're really good at replacing those losses, we're not replacing 100% of that sodium. And this is one of the reasons why I really discourage things like salt tabs. Salt tabs are exactly what it says they are. They are a sodium bomb. And I have seen lots of GI issues come about from salt tabs, unless you have a lot of confidence level that that is something you need and you've worked with someone who's helped you with that, outline that that's what you need, but they generally cause more trouble than they're worth. So as you increase your fluid replenishment, you can increase that sodium replenishment. If you start to fall off of that fluid intake, then we need to fall off sodium. Um, Storage, fluid storage. So whether that's having a bladder or bottles is personal choice. I actually prefer bottles because for me, I'm a horrible drinker. I do not do well with hydrating. So I like to physically see my flasks. I like to see that I'm drinking it and pressing it and feeling it to know, okay, how much of this have I drank? But a combination can be nice, especially if you're someone who likes to have sports drink in one flask, fluid and or water in the other. That can also be a nice combination to have. That if you get tired of the sports drink, sometimes you just want plain water, or vice versa. So the soft flasks can be really nice. And when we put this kind of plan together, let's say that this person loses 1.1 liters per hour, and we've identified that her sodium concentration of her sweat is about pretty average at 900 milligrams per liter. Um, for her, we've established a goal of 90% fluid replacement and 70% sodium replacement. And that sodium goes in line with this chart from a mathematical model from a study that I referenced. So we can see here that we're looking at about 70%. We've established that she needs about 60 grams of carb per hour. And this is where breaking down these recommendations into time goals can be really helpful during the race. Whenever folks are new to fueling, what I find is that we have a goal and we know that we need 60 grams of carb an hour, but how do we break that down into something that is attainable? And this is where eating on a schedule is imperative at helping you actually fuel. How many of us have done a run and with good intentions to fuel, and then we get an hour, 2 hours in, and we're going, oh, I still haven't eaten anything. Oh well. I highly recommend starting 45 minutes to an hour into the race. Starting to take in fuel at time intervals. Depending on what types of fuel you're eating and the dense carb density of the gels. Um, with this imaginary client here, we have established that she is going to eat something every 30 minutes. So it's an easy time to stick with. So she's going to alternate a gel with a serving of a chew. So every other, she's just alternating. So keeping it super simple, because we've all probably experienced during races when we are kind of just brain fried, like you can't math, like basic math is hard. So we want to keep things as simple as possible. And then we broke down her fluid goal into time intervals as well. So sorry to go back and forth from imperial to metric, but if we're having a fluid intake goal of 0.9 liters per hour, let's break this down into an easy time increment. So for her, what we're saying is every 10 minutes, you should probably drink about 5 ounces or roughly 150 mils. A medium mouthful of fluid for most people is about an ounce. So if anyone's had a shot of alcohol, that's about 1.5 ounces. So we're saying about 5 big gulps every 10 minutes. And that lines up really nicely with the 30-minute, so that we're also going to take in fluid when we're taking in the gels. And when I get into the course specific, um, what can be super helpful, especially with Speedgoat. Speedgoat is such a variable race, right? There's a lot of elevation gain and a lot of elevation loss. There's very technical terrain. We need to plan how much fluid we want to put in our pack between aid stations. So what was really helpful for me with Speedgoat in the 3 times that I've done it, the very first time I didn't have a metric point, right? Like I didn't know how fast I was going to run it. What I actually did was I went into the Speedgoat website and looked at past results and looked at where I typically land in really big races like that, in front of the pack, middle of the pack, back of the pack, and looked at times. Um, I also did some Strava stalking and looked at the time other people had done it and the times between the different aid stations. Um, if, I don't know if anyone else does things like that, but I do find it very helpful so that I know that I'm not going to run out of fluid between aid stations because I drastically underestimated the time between. Um, what I will say is the toughest time, I would say, is between your first hidden peak uh, to um, the Mineral Basin aid station. This is a slog. I highly recommend really getting a lot of fluid, re-upping your fluid a whole bunch at that first hidden peak, because this area down here gets so hot and exposed. Um, there is that water pipe shortly before the Mineral Basin aid station. There's no other aid station there. It's simply literally just the water pipe to refill. Um, Other thing to consider with this type of terrain, right? We're starting at about 8,000 feet in Speedgoat. We go up to about 11,000 feet elevation. I wanted to keep things as simple as possible with this fueling example. But when we are at elevation and as we ascend, our bodies start to work a lot harder. Our carbohydrate oxidation rate increases, our fluid needs increase, but our thirst response decreases. And this is why it's so important to know your sweat rate and to fuel based on your historical data, because your body is not going to tell you what you need. So having that dialed in of what you need can be really helpful when you are out here exposed and not really feeling the thirst that you would expect to feel. Someone actually asked the question, if your skin is covered in fine salt after a run, does that give any indication that you're consuming too much or too little sodium, or does it just mean you're a salty sweater? If you're often caked with sodium or salt after a run, that could indicate that you're a pretty salty sweater. I'm a pretty average sweater. My sweat sodium concentration is in that 900 to 1,000 milligrams per liter. And I'll sometimes see that on my own clothes and skin, but not that often. So I would imagine that if you're frequently seeing that, you probably are like up in the higher range. I also put the 30K on here as well. I don't have experience with the 30K, but It is a lot of vert. Arguably, it's steeper for the total mileage than the 50K. So same goes with here that your start to your first aid station is a big climb and a long way. So I would start very um, well fueled with enough fluid and what you need food wise to get you to that 9.3 mile aid station. Oh, I guess you got hydration here at 9.3, pardon me. So practicing your race day fueling plan, waiting and hoping that on race day you're going to be able to eat more than you usually do is not a great solution. We're going to be working harder on race day than we are in training, and that can make us not want to fuel as well. So, what runs should we fuel? I would say any harder effort workouts of at least 70 to 80 minutes in total duration would be great runs to start to bring fuel on. Um, Not even just from the perspective of you have a higher work rate, so you're burning, your carb oxidation is higher, but also to get used to eating and drinking when you're breathing really hard. Getting used to getting in that hydration vest while you're working really hard. Um, any easy effort run that is over at least 90 minutes in duration, bringing some bringing some fuel on, and then really trying to practice eating on big climbs. And if you're someone who is training, like maybe if you're coming in from out of town, you don't have big hills, so you're doing incline treadmill and stair stepper for preparation. Yeah, try to start fueling on some of these big uphill climbs, any sort of technical descents. That descent from from the first hidden peak, you descend and you're on a really nice, you're on road in a single track trail. Um, it's nice and you can really open up and kind of go fast, and that can make it trickier to want to get into your fueling. And then it takes you into a very rocky wash, and that is a very, very technical descent. And it's long, right? I told you that that's probably the biggest slog, at least for me, of the race, of getting used to getting in the vest while you're navigating a technical descent. So practice, practice, practice. And if you're not hitting at least the 60 grams of carb per hour, um, then starting small, start small and build up. So if that starts out with 25 to 30 grams an hour, so that's basically a gel, and start working your way up in your workouts and your long runs. And so maybe your first run, you're going to do that every hour on the hour. And then the next run, you're going to try to add one more in. So just keep kind of moving the needle up. Last thing before I open up to questions, because we are at that 45-minute mark, heat management. I'm bringing this up because overheating really affects your nutrition status. So making sure that you can stay cool can really help not just maintain your performance in general, but also your nutrition tolerance. So if we are overheated, the body is working extra hard to cool you down. So we're going to get reduced blood flow to the digestive tract. And that's going to reduce our tolerance for fluid and food, and that can result in stomach cramping and nausea. So Speedgoat is great. There's ice everywhere, every aid station ice, just about. So making or buying ice bandanas, ice, or having people put ice in the back of your hydration vest at the aid station. This is my friend Andrea. She's wearing the Lululemon ice tank. I also wore the same thing for Speedgoat last year. You can't see it very well, but on her chest, you can almost see where it looks like it's open right here. That's actually a giant pocket to stick ice. And then there's also one in the back, and that's what her boyfriend is doing, is pouring ice back there. There's icy sponges at a lot of the aid stations. Those can go a long way. So when I get to the start line of Speedgoat, I am almost shivering because I'm starting with ice, because I know how important it is to stay cool, for helping also just stay comfortable. So highly recommend incorporating ice into your plan. That's all I have for today. I would love to open it for questions. I see one that's come in right now. Thoughts on long sleeve sun shirts to help manage heat and sun? Yeah, I think that those can be great. Those can be good options. I think it's just personal preference. Some people really don't like them because they feel claustrophobic. Um, I personally don't like to race with them, but I do wear them in almost all my training runs. Um, the person with the raised hand, last name Townsend. You can unmute yourself. Oh, okay. It won't let you actually. You have to put it in the chat box. Someone asked, what do you think about dextrin for use in homemade gels? Allegedly, what Scratch uses in their high carb mix. Yeah, absolutely. You can buy that. You can buy that off brand. I haven't done it. I would need to look to see like how much of it to put in a gel, like how to concentrate it for sure. The other company that does use dextrin is Blanks Sports Nutrition. They do customize. You can do like powdered gels. It's actually pretty cheap too. Not as cheap as my homemade, but like they sell the soft flat, like the 150 ml soft flask, and you can customize your gel, like flavors, sugar types, percentage of the different sugars, and they have a dextrin option. So that's something that you can look into. Someone said, can you re-show the slide of your homemade gel mix? Yeah, I'd love to. Where did I go past it? I don't know where I am. Ah, there it is. Someone said you stated NAC was providing gels on race days or similar drink mix provided. I believe so. I don't know exactly what they're providing from NAC. Maybe they have more information. Oh, so Jessica can chime in on that.
Yes, so they should provide, my understanding is gels and yeah, their drink mix, although maybe they have two different options. I'd have to look up which one. I'll try to do that really quickly, but it should be in the runner guide when the runner guide comes out, which is usually about a month ahead of race day. But you're also welcome. I can drop the athlete services chat email in the chat, excuse me, and then you could always email and they should be able to give you a full list of what's provided. It kind of sometimes can vary race to race, so I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but I will put what I know down there and then an email that you can email and ask what I don't know.
Thank you. Someone else asked, what are your recommendations for slower and longer races when it comes to proteins and fats? I think it just depends. It's kind of a loaded question. It kind of depends on duration of the race. And there's a lot of debate on this because we don't have a lot of data on it. So what I do say is if you are, doing more like 100-mile race, I'm just going to go. I know that there's like 50-mile, 100K in between, but we're going to go up to a 100-mile race. Then yeah, we want to be incorporating fat and protein. You're not going to want to do just gels for 24 plus straight hours. But I usually say limit the protein and fat to things that you're consuming every few hours. So if we use an example like, I'm not sponsored by NAC, but I do like they have a puree. That has like 7 grams of fat and 7 grams of protein. That's not something you would want to be taking in every hour, but it would be something I'd want to layer in like every other hour, every few couple hours, or waiting until you get to an aid station and then kind of intaking the fat and protein things. There's really just I've presented on this and the data behind it, but there is a lot of uh kind of just anecdotal experience with the fat and protein. Someone said, when I try to drink water when I run, I end up just needing to go to the bathroom. Does this mean to drink less? It could be. It also could be the volume and speed at which you're drinking. So sometimes a lot of volume of water at once can trigger that the response to urinate. So you could try a little bit less and really hydrating slowly, or is that when I run, when you're on the run? Um, yeah, I would experiment with the volume amount and then doing some sweat rate testing and see and getting your data to see how much should you be intaking to replenish. Someone asked, going back to the multiple transportable carbohydrates. Is the recommendation for taking different sugars because utilizing one type of sugar only would result in depleting the transporter, and then you're not able to utilize that fuel source until the transporters can replenish? Essentially, yeah, you get backup. You think you get a traffic jam. Yeah, exactly. And that's why like things like honey, for example, it's natural, right? It's great. Honey is pretty high fructose to glucose ratio, and that's why if we're getting into that 60-gram carb an hour plus, things like honey, I don't like to recommend as much because of that reason, not because honey's bad. It's just because of the types of sugar. Maple syrup's a little better on the fructose. It's actually pretty heavily sucrose, and sucrose is a glucose fructose combo. So it's what we call disaccharide, whereas glucose and fructose are monosaccharides. So they're single sugars. Sucrose is a chain of two sugars of a glucose and a fructose. So additionally, what are your thoughts on Scratch super high carb mix that is high carb but low sugar? Is sugar important? Yeah, the Scratch super high carb mix is nice. It uses what's called a cluster dextrin. It's a huge sugar molecule. Some people have issues with it. Like because it is a large molecule, it takes a lot longer to digest. So some people tolerate it really well, and then some people don't. Like we end up with a little more reflux, belching. That's actually what I get when I've used that. I really like the product. But I personally get more of that. So it's something you can experiment with. I actually had a client who um, didn't have use of a limb, and so he really struggles to fuel because he's only got one arm that he can do things with, and he loves cluster dextrin. Like he almost exclusively does that liquid scratch high carb mix during races and finds it super helpful. Someone said thoughts on bicarb. What does the data say? Um, Bicarb can be helpful, but the tricky thing is it's a giant sodium load. So we have to be mindful of it. I usually like to say let's dial in other things first because those are going to have more impact, like the fluid, the fueling, before adding in something like bicarb. And in fact, before bicarb, if I were to recommend supplements that are helpful for performance, I would probably opt for, and I think this is a little more than what that we have time to speak about today, but doing things like hyperhydrating with glycerol can be really helpful, especially during a hot race. Creatine can also help with hyperhydration. It brings fluid into the muscle cells. So I personally would opt for those things. There can be a lot of GI issues associated with bicarb. So sometimes the juice just isn't worth the squeeze for me to want to recommend it. Someone said, should we replace exactly what we lose or take in slightly more water? No, we never want to take in, replace 100% of the fluid. We're really looking to offset and not lose more than 3% of our body mass during activity. So it's okay to have a little bit of that dehydration. We just don't want it to be super profound, but yeah, you don't want to be evening it out because you're likely going to end up with overhydration. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes. I'm happy to stay on later though, but if anyone like wants to jump off, that's fine too. Odd but real question. What's everyone do on Speedgoat race day when they have to go to the bathroom? I just go. Yeah. Last year I ended up peeing a lot during the race because fire, smoky air came in, and my throat was just getting so dry, and that I just kept drinking and drinking because I think I was just trying to ease my throat, and ended up peeing four times, I think, which was too much during the race. But yeah, I think it's normal if you have to if you have to urinate once during the race, once or twice, that's totally fine. I would say any more than that, I would be concerned that you're overhydrating a little bit. We can maintain a fine, safe level of hydration in a race like Speedgoat and only be urinating a couple times during the race. So that's a good question. And if you have to go number two, best of luck. Sorry, hope it's at Hidden Peak and you can go inside and go to the bathroom. Oh, okay. So Jessica put in information about NAC. Someone said, "What do you think of pickle juice and Coke?" So pickle juice is often used to alleviate a muscle cramp, and it actually is effective at relieving a muscle cramp. It's an acute response though. Some people it was previously thought that the pickle juice is helping to alleviate a muscle cramp by with the sodium, but it's actually the like tartness, um, yeah, the tartness of the acetic acid of pickle juice that does something with your neuromuscular response to the cramp. And I can attest that it works. It just sometimes the cramp comes back. So I've done it before in a race where I've gotten a cramp and taken in the pickle juice. They have pickle juice at aid stations at Speedgoat. Coke, I just recommend using sparingly. And the reason is Coke is very concentrated sugar. And if you just chug a bunch of Coke at once, what you're going to do is you're going to flood your digestive tract with a high volume of sugar at once. And what can happen similarly when we have a big sodium load that goes into the gut is we're now going to pull in fluid into the gut. To help with absorption, and that can lead to diarrhea. So I would say sip the Coke, don't chug it at an aid station. Oh, so Jessica responded with the portable toilets and at certain aid stations. See, she gave a much better answer for that.
You could
Um,
also just pee where you need to pee.
I know that's what I did last year. I was like,
That
sorry,
answer was great too. Sometimes you
everyone.
can't wait till the aid station.
Yeah, yeah. Is there good timing to take creatine racing and training? Yeah, like you need to build up creatine stores in the body. So if you're just taking like the standard like dose on the creatine packaging, which is generally about a scoop, which is about 5 grams of creatine, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to build up the phosphocreatine stores in your body. So you can start it then. If you don't start it, you can do what's called like creatine loading. The loading's a lot though. You're taking like the 5 grams 4 times a day for a couple weeks. Like who has time for that? Um, I don't. I'm not gonna remember to do that. I think most people don't. So really creatine is just something you can just take. It's more about consistency of taking it every day. So it's been shown to help prevent muscle cramping in football players. We really don't have a lot of data on endurance um, endurance activities with creatine use, but it very likely might help with alleviating or preventing muscle cramping.
And then Townsend, I figured out a way to unmute your mic. So, or to allow your mic. So if you just want to unmute and ask your question, if that's easier.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, well, first, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. One, thank you so much. This was very helpful. I think I asked in the comment section, essentially, is there anything that you have observed on race day for people who are maybe new to ultras, from a nutritional standpoint that's just like a huge red flag? I know you kind of mentioned salt, people just taking a lot of salt tablets, but is there anything that is just like a definite stay away from or just highly discouraged? And maybe aside from some of the stuff you outlined, is there like a go-to thing that you're really about that you like to kind of do to kick off your race that you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say really that one of the biggest things, and this was more than what I presented on today, but is your nutrition throughout your training cycle. Um, that's going to be so helpful if we think about the trickle down effect of if that helps you train better, then that's going to improve your performance and going to make you feel better on race day. Um, with this carbohydrate focus of during the race, one of the things that really helps us tolerate more carbs isn't just taking in carbs during activity, but carbs in our day-to-day diet. If you are training for Speedgoat and you're not just walking out there off the couch, um, we need to be thinking of having a high carb diet on a daily basis. And I know that that's a vague term right now, but the more carbohydrates you eat, your body actually adapts. They start to create more transporters for the carbohydrates in your intestines. So it actually really does help you adapt to a higher carbohydrate intake. So I think prioritizing nutrition during the training cycle as much as you're prioritizing nutrition for race day. And then I think the biggest thing with beginners is that they get behind nutritionally very fast. You're
Mm.
anxious, you're thinking about a lot of things, and now all of a sudden time has passed and you really haven't started to fuel. So I think it's really having that plan and saying, okay, like these are the time increments that I'm going to eat and drink. And the only reason why I'm going to deviate from these things is if my body's telling me that this is off. Like if
Mm.
you were starting to urinate a lot and or something like that, then yeah, you might want to pull back on your fluid intake plan. Maybe something was off there. Um, or, if you did notice you were eating too much sodium and you notice, oh, I'm falling off of my fluid, my tummy's
Mm.
not feeling great. Okay, I am gonna pull back on some sodium stuff and try to get my fuel or my water that's not the sports drink. Um, but yeah,
Cool. All right. Thank you so much.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're at time, so we can just out of respect, I know maybe a few people have hopped if they needed to, but again, thank you, Hayden, so much for all of your knowledge and sharing your expertise with us. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you everyone for your participation and for asking questions. I think obviously that's all really helpful as well. And then I know I said this in the beginning in the chat, but totally forgot in the beginning. But thank you, huge thank you also to Women of the Wasatch. They've been an incredible partner to us at Speedgoat as we've started the Start Line project, which these webinars are part of that. Just trying to get more women to the start line. And really, Women of the Wasatch has been, like I said, an incredible partner in just about every aspect of this race. But these webinars being one of them. And I know Hayden is a member of Women of the Wasatch. So pretty cool connection there. But we just, again, want to thank you and especially thank Hayden for giving us her time. And can't wait to see you all at Speedgoat in July.
Good luck, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I hope it was helpful. And Jessica, did you say you'll get the slides out? Do I need to send you a copy of this?
Yeah, well, I think maybe you sent me that link, but yeah, we can,
Oh, I did.
I'm trying to think how we could get the slides. I think I can send a follow-up email to all the attendees. So maybe I'll do that and then can send a link to the slide. And then I'm glad you mentioned that, Hayden, too, because also I'll be able to save the recording of this webinar and then I'll be posting it online. So if you missed it or want to go back and listen to something, obviously you didn't miss it, you're here. But if you want to go back and listen to something, you'll be able to do that as well. So yeah, I'll work on emailing slides and then getting the recording of the webinar up online soon.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All
Thank you.
right.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.